Here in Japan, of course, in the wake of the Fukushima disaster in 2011, energy remains one of the central topics politically, socially and economically within the country. We've also had a commitment to deregulation within the industry, or further deregulation, particularly thinking about unbundling generation and transmission of energy within the country. And just last week we had the cabinet approval of Japan's energy policy. And within that policy we saw a continued commitment to nuclear energy. You'll recall, of course, that under the previous administration, under the Democrats, there was a commitment to phase out nuclear energy in Japan. Of course, no nuclear energy stations remain in operation at the moment. We might expect maybe 1, 2 or perhaps more to be coming back online in this fiscal year, though of course this remains both a very hot political issue and an economic issue as well. Well, to help us discuss these issues today, I'm delighted to welcome our panel. To my immediate right is Akihiro Sawa, Director General of the International Environment and Economic Institute and Executive Senior Fellow 21st Century Public Policy Institute. We then have Professor Takeo Kikawa, Professor at the Graduate School of Commerce and Management at Hitotsubashi University here in Tokyo. And then to Professor Kikawa's right, we have Kazuhiro Ueda, Professor at the Graduate School of Economics, Kyoto University. And finally, on the extreme right, we have Joseph Beavish, Office Managing Partner of Latham and Watkins. So thank you very much, all of you, for joining us today. I'd like to get our discussions going by posing a question to you with reference to the energy policy that was agreed last week at Cabinet level. Could I ask you whether you see this as the energy policy that's been agreed as a pragmatic response to national and global realities, or with particular reference to new and renewable energies, is this a missed opportunity? Sawa-sensei, if I could ask for you first.
In the coordination process, there have been different opinions expressed, and what came up eventually, what kind of energy mix is going to be made is not quantitatively shown. So in the future, a quantitative decision will have to be made, and what kind of policies will become clearer in the future. See, the fundamentals of energy policy is a stable supply quantitatively, and also securing the supply stably. So in terms of quantity, and also in terms of the stability, renewable energy is not the key.
For example, there were some mentions about trying to use different energy sources, including hydrogen, emphasizing the importance of nuclear energy, and probably trying to use some of the spent fuel in a different way. Also, they placed great importance on wind and solar, etc., renewable energies. In other words, there were many specific mentions about specific kinds of energy, but no overall picture about what will happen in 2030, what will be the energy mix in 2030. So in that sense, I would not give a passing grade to this cabinet decision approved energy plan. You can't keep postponing these difficult questions.
We are not able to see clear direction for the future. What the energy is going to be in Japan is not clear. It is true that there are specific discussions, the renewable energy and the reform of the electric power system, but the overall direction, there is no clear vision shown in the plan. So the role of the base plan is to show the clear direction so that investors and business operators know which direction to go.
Or do you think that Japan should be phasing out nuclear energy in favor of a much bigger role for... Yes.
Yeah.
Well, nuclear energy, how is it described in the basic energy policy? First of all, it talks about the fact that it must be operating in a safe way. But what does that actually mean, in a safe way? the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, if those regulations, if those standards are passed, then does that mean that we can consider a nuclear facility to be safe? In other words, what about evacuation procedures in case an accident occurs? That is really part of the overall safety issue. But in that sense, I was a member of part of the deliberations going to these standards. But what I think is very, very important to make sure is that we have to make sure that there is not going to be anyone who is going to be irradiated by nuclear power plants. That's the kind of safety standard that people in Japan really want. And if we use this as a pre-assumption, that means that there's going to have enormous costs related to building and operating a nuclear power plant. So again, this vague wording of ensuring that they are safe, if you take into account the economic considerations, you can't realize this so quickly or so easily.
The cost to Japan of imported fossil fuels has dramatically increased in recent years. And maybe if I could ask you, Mr. Beavis, for your thoughts on the energy mix at the moment. And in particular, maybe if we could focus a little bit on gas and the role that gas is going to play within that.
Sure. Well, I think to answer your original question, it is a pragmatic approach, and maybe it's a missed opportunity, but that opportunity remains to invest more heavily in renewables. But, you know, we just heard about Mr. Abe's plans, and I think his primary goal is to stimulate the economy. So it would be counterintuitive to commit Japan to a very expensive or impractical energy future. So I think it's a pragmatic approach. He's just telling everybody what we already know, that some of the nuclear capability presumably will be green-lighted as being safe, and will contribute to Japan's shorter-term to medium-term energy security by continuing to provide dependable, low-cost energy.
The fundamental situation surrounding energy supply in Japan, I think, has not changed, and as a result, energy policy in Japan will fundamentally not change. We must, again, continue using nuclear energy, and in regard to fossil fuels, just simply importing lots and lots of gas is also not necessarily a great option, because it means that we might have too high a dependency on just this one kind of energy source.
It might be that there is a modest increase in the role for renewables in energy policy, but does deregulation itself create new opportunities for new entrants into the market who might be much more focused on promoting new and renewable energies? How do you see deregulation shaping the market as we go forward over the next few years?
According to my understanding at present, if we look at the electricity system, I think we're at a huge turning point. I think we're going to be much more of a network-based, decentralized system going forward. I think this trend is undeniable. That's my understanding. So in that sense, deregulation will help that process as well.
In Japan, just say renewable, then everybody would say that we should be promoting the use of renewable. But for what technology, how much investment is going to be made, whether it comes from private sector money or the government money, then you have to find where your perspective is and what is the context. You have to make that context clear. Otherwise, it's not possible to have a very clear discussion.
In regard to energy security, I think the most important point is that we need to be able to have the development of very strong electricity companies who can survive in the international competitive markets. When I think about this, I realize that the Japanese oil companies, power companies, gas companies, they're basically have only looked at the domestic markets. They've not really worked on the international stage at all. That makes them very weak in comparison to their global competitors.
How do you see energy policy evolving over the medium term? What would you see as the right sort of mix of energy sources, perhaps looking out to 2030 as Kakawa-sensei just did?
Well, I think Kakawa-sensei, I would agree with that mix in the short to medium term. But I think Japan, like Europe and like North America, is going to migrate increasingly on an economic basis and also for energy security. And I think it's important to point out that energy security doesn't just mean affordable supplies of energy. it means being able to control your energy destiny. And ultimately, the only way to do that is either to purchase the supplies offshore, which is possible. Japanese companies are buying shale resources in North America. But ultimately, I think it's going to be producing energy onshore through renewable, environmentally, appropriate, and ultimately economically efficient means.
Just as a general comment, after the Fukushima nuclear power plant accident, I think a huge energy problem did occur, did become prominent in Japan. But instead of thinking of this as a disaster and a negative thing only, it can be thought of as an opportunity. It's a great way to develop new technologies, but also to change for the better, radically, the Japanese way of doing things. It might create new business opportunities. I look at it as a positive development.
So I'm then going to invite Ueda-sensei Kikawa-sensei to depart, and thank you very much for your input there. Well, thinking back a little bit about this key component of the energy mix, nuclear, we know that the Abe administration is committed to switching back nuclear power stations back on as quickly as they can be green-lighted. What's your thoughts on the number of stations that we might see in this year or in the next year?
That's a technical analysis that I don't really have a view on. But regardless of when and how many come back on, I think it's a stopgap measure at best. I don't think that the Abe administration is going to invest new capital in new nuclear facilities. I think they're going to continue to use the capability that is here to the extent it can be confirmed as being safe. But eventually, as those projects reach the end of their life cycle, they won't be replaced. There will be more gases and other transition. And then, as I said before, I think long-term the future is in renewables and new technologies.
But I'd like to follow up just on that point of the UK experience of deregulation. And part of that there has been great volatility in prices, particularly for households. Is that something that the Japanese consumer is going to tolerate?
But the nice thing about the UK example, also we had a similar, terrible example in California. Deregulation permits instability and volatility, but there are models now for addressing that, and I think the coordination that was mentioned earlier, and advances in technology, hopefully will address some of that. But you can't just deregulate and just sort of leave the baby to fend for him or herself. There has to be an implementation and an infrastructure, and it has to be able to outlive a change of administration.
Especially when we talk about the energy field, we have to think about the risks. We have to think about the big social risks, because that is what energy policies are about. We have to be able to hedge those risks. We have to sometimes have to ask the people to bear a premium to be able to hedge against such risk. And I think that needs to be explained more clearly to the public, in other words, and that will help people decide on what the ideal energy mix will be for Japan. Unless you have that kind of concept in your head, it's hard to have a calm discussion about this.
Thank you. Well, I think now's the time to draw our conversation to a close. And maybe if I could just summarize as saying that it seems that on balance, Japan has the energy policy that economically and pragmatically it needs at the moment. There are certainly some very interesting developments around deregulation, new technologies, and so on. But there are a number of questions that remain to be asked, a number of models that need to be built about what's going to be best for Japan now and for the future, economically, politically, and environmentally as well. It just remains for me then to invite you to thank our discussants for this panel. Thank you.